Good evening, dreamer, and welcome back to Dreamy Science Stories. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're not traveling to a place so much as an idea, a vast white presence at the edge of the world, Antarctic. This is the only continent that belongs to no one. No cities glowing at night, no borders drawn in ink, no permanent footsteps, only temporary arrivals. Here the world feels wider. The air moves freely, carried by steady winds. Light stretches low across the surface, never rushing, never sharp. And between those elements, wind, light, and open space, there is room to breathe. As you gently enter this quiet expanse, you may notice something subtle begin to change. Time itself seems to slow. Moments lengthen. Thoughts loosen their grip. The noise of the human world fades until it feels very far away. Antarctic does not ask for attention. It simply exists, calm, distant, and steady, inviting you to rest within its stillness. And if these peaceful journeys help you unwind, you're welcome to gently like, share, or leave a quiet comment. It helps these stories find other curious minds drifting toward rest. For now, there's nothing else to do. Just settle in and let the white silence carry you forward. Antarctic is unlike any other continent on Earth, not because it is simply colder or farther away or harder to reach, but because it exists outside the patterns that define most places we know. Other continents reveal themselves through variety. Colors shift with seasons. Cities gather light. Roads carve direction into the land. Antarctic does none of this. It does not unfold gradually. It does not welcome you with landmarks or familiarity. It appears instead as a presence, broad, pale, and calm, asking nothing, promising nothing, and remaining exactly as it is. From the first moment you think about Antarctic, distance becomes part of the experience. Not only physical distance, measured in kilometers or days of travel, but emotional distance as well. This is the place farthest from everyday human life on Earth. No crowds move through it, no permanent communities shape it, no cycles of construction and decay repeat across its surface. Antarctic exists almost entirely outside the daily rhythms that govern the rest of the planet. It is not shaped by morning commutes, seasonal harvests, or expanding skylines. Instead, it follows older, quieter rhythms, those of light, wind, and time itself. It is the only continent that does not belong to anyone. No nation claims it as home. No capital city stands at its center. No borders divide its surface into competing territories. Where the rest of the world has been carefully outlined, lines drawn, names assigned, ownership declared, Antarctic remains intentionally undefined. Not empty, but unclaimed. A shared silence agreed upon by humanity, rare and fragile. This absence of ownership changes the feeling of the place. There is no sense of arrival in the usual way. No feeling of entering someone else's space. Instead, it feels as though you are stepping into something neutral, something that exists beyond possession. And yet, despite its immense size, Antarctic is often hidden in plain sight. On many world maps, it appears compressed, distorted, or pushed to the very edges of the page. The eye is drawn instead to continents filled with detail and color, places dense with human stories. Antarctic becomes a margin, a background, a blank. But this visual habit does not reflect reality. Seen from space, Antarctic is not a peripheral detail. It is a continuous, white expanse, stretching across the southernmost parts of the planet without interruption. No sharp breaks, no fragmented coastlines pulling the eye away, just a single, unified presence. From above, it does not compete with other continents for attention. It does not need to. Its scale alone is enough. At first glance, the white appears uniform, almost flat. But as your attention lingers, the surface begins to change. Antarctic is not made of a single shade of white. It is composed of countless variations, subtle and quiet. There are soft whites shaped by wind and time, pale blues pressed gently into the surface, hints of silver where low sunlight stretches across the land at an angle. Shadows here do not behave the way they do elsewhere. They are long and gentle, never harsh. They drift rather than fall. They blur rather than define. The longer you look, the more the landscape resists simplification. It does not reveal itself quickly. It asks for patience. Antarctic reflects more sunlight than any other place on Earth. Its vast pale surface sends a significant portion of incoming solar energy back into space. This simple act, quiet, constant, unnoticed by most, plays a critical role in regulating the planet's temperature. Without Antarctic, Earth would absorb far more heat. Global temperatures would rise faster. Climate systems would become more unstable. The balance that allows life to exist, as it does now, would be harder to maintain. Yet Antarctic performs this role without drama. There is no visible mechanism at work, no motion to follow, no sound to mark the process. It simply reflects light, day after day, year after year. This kind of influence is easy to overlook. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. But it is foundational. Antarctic is the true southern anchor of the planet, the real bottom of the world, not in importance, but in orientation. Here, familiar directions begin to lose their meaning. At the South Pole, every direction outward is north. There is no farther south to travel. The idea of progress in a single direction dissolves. Movement becomes relative, circular. Standing here changes how you think about place, about movement, about orientation itself. When people imagine arriving in Antarctic, they often expect immediate discomfort, sharp cold, harsh conditions, a sense of danger. But the first sensation many describe is something else entirely. Openness. The horizon feels distant in a way that is difficult to describe. There are no familiar reference points to measure against. No trees, no buildings, no slopes to break the view. The land stretches outward in all directions, smooth and unhurried. The space around you feels larger than the human scale was designed to hold. And within that space, there is no pressure to act, decide, or respond. The world you know, filled with notifications, schedules, and constant demands, feels suddenly remote, not gone, but muted, as if placed gently behind glass. Here, nothing is in a hurry. The land does not change quickly. The air moves steadily, without urgency. Light lingers longer than expected, sliding slowly across the surface. time itself seems to loosen its grip. Minutes widen, thoughts stretch out and soften. The mind, accustomed to jumping forward, begins to rest where it is. Antarctic does not challenge you in the way extreme places often do. It does not ask you to prove endurance or bravery. It does not test you. Instead, it removes distractions. Without noise, without clutter, without constant signals, attention naturally turns inward. Breathing slows. Awareness expands. This is not a place that overwhelms. It is a place that clears. To step onto Antarctic is not to enter a hostile environment. It is to step outside the familiar world altogether, outside its pace, outside its density, outside its constant motion. And in that quiet removal, something subtle happens. You begin to feel smaller, not insignificant, but gently reduced to scale, part of something vast, steady, and unconcerned with urgency. Antarctic does not tell stories loudly. It does not offer spectacle. It offers space. Space to pause, space to breathe, space to let the mind drift without direction. And as you stand there, surrounded by white stretching endlessly outward, one realization settles in quietly. You have not simply arrived at a distant continent. You have stepped into a different rhythm of the planet itself. A rhythm that moves more slowly, more evenly, and far beyond the reach of the familiar human world. Antarctic does not feel flat, even when it looks that way. Beneath the wide, pale surface lies an elevation that few people expect. Antarctic is, on average, the highest continent on Earth, not because it rises sharply into dramatic peaks, but because the entire landmass is gently lifted upwards, carried by the immense thickness of ice spread across it. This height is quiet. It does not announce itself with cliffs or ridges. It reveals itself slowly through the way the air feels thinner, clearer, and lighter, through the way breathing becomes more noticeable, through the way the horizon seems to sit just a little higher than it should. The surface rises into a vast ice plateau, stretching for thousands of kilometers without interruption. This plateau has no obvious center and no clear edge. It is not something you reach. It is something you are already standing on. There are no valleys guiding the eye, no slopes suggesting direction. The land does not lead you anywhere in particular. Elsewhere on Earth, landscapes quietly instruct us. Rivers carve paths, hills channel movement, forests open and close space. Antarctic gives no such instructions. There are no natural roadways here, no paths worn smooth by centuries of use, no lines etched into the land to suggest where movement should flow. Every direction is equally possible. Every direction is equally empty. This absence of guidance changes the way the body moves. Without paths to follow, travel becomes deliberate. Each step is chosen rather than assumed. Motion slows not because it is difficult, but because it is undefined. And above this vast, elevated surface, the air is almost never still. The wind in Antarctic rarely stops. It is not something that arrives and leaves. It is something that exists. Often, the wind begins high on the ice plateau itself. As air cools, it grows heavier. Gravity takes hold, and the air begins to slide downward, flowing gently toward lower elevations. These are katabatic winds, not storms, but movements, not violent, but persistent. They travel like invisible waterfalls. No roar, no crash, just motion. The wind does not howl here. There are no forests to rattle, no buildings to whistle through, no uneven surfaces to tear sound from the air. Instead, the wind glides. It moves low and steady across the ice, smoothing the surface as it passes. It lifts fine snow into faint, drifting veils that hover just above the ground before settling again. It reshapes the land slowly, patiently. The influence of the wind is everywhere, yet it leaves no clear mark, no signature, no proof of intention. It does not carve, it adjusts. Over time, the wind becomes the primary sculptor of the surface. It gathers snow into long, subtle ridges. It sharpens some edges while softening others. It smooths imperfections until the land feels almost unreal. And still, it leaves no trace that can be pointed to and named. There are no handprints in Antarctic, no fingerprints pressed into the ice, only form, endlessly refined, endlessly revised. Despite the constant presence of wind, there are moments when Antarctic becomes utterly silent. Days when sound seems to disappear entirely. This silence is not simply the absence of noise. It feels substantial, dense, as if the air itself has thickened and settled into place. There is no distant hum, no background vibration of life continuing elsewhere, no faint echo of human activity. Silence here feels complete. It presses gently against the ears, not uncomfortably, but with a sense of fullness, as though the world has decided to pause and nothing has been left unfinished. In these moments, even the wind seems to soften, not stopping, but moving so smoothly that it produces no sound at all. The surface remains unchanged. The air remains in motion, yet nothing can be heard. This kind of silence is rare on Earth. Most places are filled with layers of sound, even when they seem quiet. Insects hum, leaves shift, water moves. Antarctic strips these layers away, and when sound does appear, it arrives alone. A single footstep becomes an event. The crunch beneath a boot is sharp and clear, suspended in space. It does not blend into anything else. There is nothing to hide it. Each step sounds different from the last. The surface responds subtly, producing variations in tone and texture. A reminder that the ice beneath you is not uniform, even when it looks that way. Cold air carries sound more efficiently than warm air. Without moisture to scatter vibrations, sound can travel farther, staying intact as it moves. A quiet voice can reach surprising distances. A small noise can feel larger than expected. And yet the vast openness makes it difficult to judge where sound comes from. Without visual landmarks, distance becomes uncertain. A noise may seem close, even when it is far away, or distant when it is near. The landscape offers no reference points to correct the illusion. Here, sound and sight no longer align in familiar ways. And so, the surface of Antarctic begins to alter perception itself. Height without peaks, wind without sound, movement without direction. Everything encourages a slower pace, not because slowness is required, but because speed no longer makes sense. There is nowhere to hurry toward, nothing waiting just beyond the horizon. The plateau stretches on without promise or threat. It simply continues. And as you move across it, guided by nothing but awareness, you begin to feel the first effects of this stillness settle in. The body relaxes into the rhythm of the place. Breathing steadies, attention widens. The surface of Antarctic does not ask you to do anything. It asks you to slow down enough to notice that you already have. As the wind continues its quiet passage across the plateau, light takes on a role of its own. In Antarctic, light behaves differently. Not brighter exactly, just flatter, wider, and more patient. It spreads across the surface with very little interruption, washing over the ice rather than striking it. There are no trees to break it apart, no buildings to cast familiar shadows, no uneven ground to give depth and contrast. The result is a landscape where light erases clues. Distance becomes difficult to judge. The eye searches for perspective, for something to measure against, but finds nothing familiar. A small object on the surface may appear far away, even when it is close. A distant structure may seem within reach, even when it is not. This is not an illusion in the dramatic sense. It is a gentle confusion, one that unfolds slowly. Without shadows to anchor the view, the world loses its usual sense of depth. Everything exists on a single plane, wide, pale, and open. The surface looks smooth, even when it is not. Changes in elevation become subtle, almost invisible. Here, the landscape does not reveal itself easily. It asks the eye to slow down, to linger longer than it is accustomed to. As light stretches low across the surface, it pulls shadows outward rather than downward. A person's shadow may extend far beyond their body, thin and elongated, dissolving gradually into the white around it. These shadows do not define shape so much as soften it. They blur the boundaries between objects and space. The mind, used to sharp contrasts and clear edges, begins to adjust. It releases the expectation of certainty. In Antarctic, scale becomes unreliable. Without familiar reference points, the size of things becomes ambiguous. A distant ridge might be a gentle rise, or something much larger. A dark speck on the horizon could be a person, a vehicle, or simply a trick of light. The landscape offers no immediate correction. This loss of scale is not disorienting in a way that causes alarm. It is disarming in a quieter sense. You realize how much of your confidence in the world comes from knowing how big things are relative to you. Here, that knowledge loosens its grip. Antarctic gently removes your measuring tools, and with them, it removes urgency. When distance cannot be judged easily, speed becomes less important. There is no clear sense of how far you have gone or how far remains. Movement becomes less about reaching a destination and more about existing within space. Each step is taken with greater awareness, not out of caution, but out of curiosity. The ground beneath you may appear flat, but subtle variations reveal themselves slowly. A slight rise here, a shallow dip there. Nothing sudden, nothing demanding attention. The surface does not rush you forward. It does not challenge you to keep up. In this openness, motion naturally slows. Not because the body is tired, but because the mind no longer pushes it forward. There is nothing to chase, nothing pressing from behind. Antarctic removes the cues that normally accelerate us. No traffic signals, No crowded sidewalks, no competing rhythms. The only movement that remains is your own, and even that begins to soften. Walking becomes more deliberate, gestures become smaller, even turning your head feels slower, as if awareness itself has widened. This slowness is not imposed, it emerges. Cold air plays a role in this transformation. In Antarctic, the air is dense and dry. Sound travels farther, but it also arrives more cleanly, without distortion. There is no background noise to absorb it. A footstep sounds precise. A breath feels audible. The movement of clothing becomes noticeable. Each sound exists in isolation, fully formed and briefly present before fading into silence. This clarity changes behavior. When every sound is distinct, movements become gentler. You become more aware of how you occupy space, less inclined to rush, more inclined to pause. Silence here feels physical. It presses lightly against the senses, not as emptiness, but as presence, as if silence itself is an element, something that can be felt, not just heard. In this environment, the absence of sound is not unsettling. It is stabilizing. The mind, accustomed to constant input, begins to settle. Thoughts arrive more slowly. They linger longer. There is no need to fill the quiet. Antarctic does not respond to noise. It does not echo urgency back at you. It absorbs it. Over time, you may notice that your internal pace has changed. That familiar sense of hurry has softened into something else. Moments stretch, pauses lengthen. Standing still feels as natural as moving. This is one of the most subtle effects of the Antarctic surface. It does not force stillness, it allows it. The open space gives the mind permission to rest. Without visual clutter or constant sound, attention expands outward, then gently turns inward. You become aware of simple things: breathing, balance, the feel of cold air against your face. The surface offers nothing to distract from these sensations. And in that simplicity, movement becomes optional. There is no pressure to continue forward, no signal that says, keep going. Antarctic does not measure progress by distance traveled. It measures it by presence. The longer you remain in this environment, the more natural this feels. Slowness stops feeling like an adjustment and begins to feel like the default. This is not fatigue, it is alignment. The pace of the body begins to match the pace of the landscape. Wind moves steadily, not quickly. Light shifts slowly, almost imperceptibly. Sound appears briefly, then vanishes. Everything exists in balance. And so, every movement, every step, every turn, every pause becomes part of that balance. Antarctic does not encourage you to stop moving. It encourages you to move without urgency, to exist within space rather than pass through it. On the surface of this high, white world, stillness is not the absence of motion. It is motion freed from demand. And as you stand or walk or pause within this open, luminous silence, something becomes clear. The surface of Antarctic has not changed you by force. It has simply removed everything that was speeding you up. What remains is a quieter rhythm, one that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise of the familiar world. In most places on Earth, time is easy to recognize. Morning arrives, light rises, Evening softens the edges of the day. Night falls. These changes repeat so reliably that they disappear into routine. We rarely notice them unless something interrupts the pattern. Antarctic is such an interruption. Here, the familiar rhythm of day and night loosens until it nearly disappears. The continent does not follow the short, predictable cycles the rest of the world depends on. Instead, it stretches time outward, pulling it into long, unbroken arcs of light and darkness. Antarctic experiences 6 months of continuous daylight, and then 6 months of continuous night. Not sudden, not abrupt, but gradual, deliberate, and complete. When the sun begins its long ascent, it does not rise in the way we expect. It does not leap upward from the horizon. It circles. Day by day, it traces a wide, shallow loop through the sky, never climbing high overhead. Its path is slow and patient, as if unhurried by any schedule. The sun here never stands straight above the land. It remains tilted, always low, always distant. Light arrives at an angle, stretched thin across the surface. This angled light transforms everything it touches. Shadows lengthen instead of falling short. They slide outward, extending far beyond the objects that cast them. A person standing still may see their shadow stretch farther than a ship, thin and wavering across the ice. These shadows do not feel dramatic. They feel quiet, like time itself being drawn out and laid gently across the land. Because the sun never climbs high, there is no sharp division between moments of brightness and dimness. Light does not peak and fade. It lingers. Hours pass with little visible change. The sky shifts slowly, almost imperceptibly, as the sun continues its shallow circuit. In this environment, the idea of a day becomes unclear. There is no obvious morning, no clear afternoon, no signal that says, now something should change. Time here is not measured by sunrise and sunset. Those events are too distant, too stretched to serve as markers. Instead, time becomes something softer. At Antarctic research stations, people live by station time, an agreed-upon clock designed to maintain structure in a place where natural cues no longer suffice. Meals happen at set hours. Work begins and ends according to numbers on a screen. Artificial routines step in where the sun no longer guides behavior. But even with clocks and schedules, something begins to shift. The human body relies deeply on cycles of light and darkness. They regulate sleep, alertness, hunger, and mood. When those cycles stretch or disappear, the body responds quietly. Over time, the biological clock begins to blur. Sleep no longer aligns easily with night. Waking does not feel tied to morning. The sense of when becomes less certain. People may find themselves tired at unusual hours, alert late into what would normally be night, drawn to rest when light still fills the sky. The distinction between day and night becomes conceptual rather than felt. During the long months of daylight, the sun never fully leaves. Even when it dips low, its presence remains. The sky dims slightly, then brightens again, without ever turning dark. This constant light can feel gentle at first, a soft, unending glow that removes urgency. But over time, it alters perception. Without darkness, the mind loses one of its most familiar signals to slow down. There is no visual cue to release the day. Instead, rest must be chosen intentionally. And then, slowly, the balance reverses. As the sun begins its long descent, the light thins. The loops in the sky grow lower. Days shorten, not by minutes, but by weeks. Eventually, the sun no longer rises at all. Night arrives. But Antarctic night is not the same as night elsewhere. It is not sudden. It does not fall like a curtain. It deepens. At first, there is twilight that seems to last forever. The horizon holds a faint glow even as the sun remains hidden. Light lingers at the edges, reluctant to leave. And when darkness finally settles, it is rarely complete. The Antarctic night is not a void. It is transparent. With no cities, no roads, no artificial glow. The sky reveals itself fully. The darkness is clear rather than heavy. Stars emerge with unusual sharpness. The air, cold and dry, scatters little light. What remains feels close. The sky seems to press downward, as if drawn nearer to the surface. There is no sense of distance between land and space. The boundary blurs. Stars appear brighter, not because they have changed, but because nothing interferes with their light. They seem closer, more present, as if suspended just above the plateau. Looking upward, it becomes easier to notice motion. The slow turning of the sky, the subtle shift of constellations, the steady sweep of the planet beneath your feet. In Antarctic, the movement of Earth becomes visible, not through earthquakes or storms, but through light itself, through the way the sun circles instead of rising, through the way stars drift across the sky over long hours. You can feel the planet turning, not as a force, but as a continuity. There is no moment when it stops, no moment when it begins again. The Earth simply rotates, carrying Antarctic through light and darkness with quiet consistency. This awareness changes the experience of time. Instead of being divided into neat units, time begins to feel continuous, unbroken, flowing. Moments blend together. Hours lose their edges. The difference between now and later becomes less distinct. Time becomes something you inhabit rather than measure. In this place, time is no longer something that pushes you forward. It becomes something that surrounds you. And as you move through these long arcs of light and shadow, the realization settles in gently. Time here is not strict, not sharp, not urgent. It is elastic. It stretches, it softens, it adapts. Antarctic does not force time to behave differently. It simply removes the signals that usually keep it tight. What remains is a slower rhythm, one that belongs not to clocks or calendars, but to the turning of the planet itself. As the long Antarctic night settles fully into place, something subtle happens to the sky. It does not feel as though darkness has arrived from above. Instead, it feels as though the sky itself has moved closer. In most parts of the world, the night sky feels distant, an unreachable ceiling scattered with points of light. In Antarctic, that distance collapses. The absence of artificial glow allows the atmosphere to disappear almost entirely. There is no haze, no glow rising from the horizon, no soft veil between the ground and the stars. The sky feels open and immediate, as if it has lowered itself to meet the land. Looking upward, you do not feel small. in the way that vastness often makes people feel. Instead, you feel included, as if the surface of the earth and the dome of the sky belong to the same quiet structure. The stars appear sharper here, not brighter in intensity, but clearer in presence. Each one stands alone, unblurred, unfiltered. They do not shimmer with urgency. They remain steady, patient, unhurried. Constellations feel easier to trace, not because they are simpler, but because nothing competes with them. The mind does not have to work to separate signal from noise. And over long stretches of time, another change becomes noticeable. The stars move, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily enough that the motion becomes undeniable. In most places, the movement of the sky is hidden by routine. Clouds pass, lights interfere, sleep interrupts observation. In Antarctic, where darkness can last for months and the air remains clear, the slow turning of the sky becomes visible. Stars shift their positions relative to the horizon. Patterns rotate. The celestial sphere reveals itself not as a static backdrop, but as something in motion. This is not the motion of the stars themselves. It is the motion of the earth. Here, that fact becomes easier to feel. The planet is turning beneath you, not metaphorically, but physically. The ground is moving through space, carrying you along with it at a constant pace. There is no sensation of speed, no vibration, no sign of effort, just continuity. The rotation of the earth becomes something you can sense rather than calculate, a quiet certainty rather than an abstract fact. This awareness changes how time is experienced. Time is no longer something external, measured by devices or divided into units. It becomes something embodied. You feel time as movement rather than sequence, as flow rather than progression. Moments do not stack neatly, they blend. Without sunrise or sunset to anchor perception, there is no strong signal telling the mind when one phase has ended and another has begun. Instead, awareness drifts. Sleep comes when it comes. Wakefulness arrives without announcement. The boundary between rest and activity softens. This does not create confusion, it creates gentleness. The mind begins to let go of precision. It stops trying to track every minute. It releases the need to know exactly where it is in the day. Time becomes approximate. In Antarctic, this approximation feels natural. The body adjusts slowly. Hormones shift. Attention changes its rhythm. People often describe a sense of timelessness here, not as a loss, but as a relief. Without the constant pressure to keep pace with a schedule, the mind finds a quieter state. Thoughts lengthen, pauses deepen, silence stretches without discomfort. Even memory behaves differently. Events are recalled less as sequences and more as impressions. Light, shadow, and stillness blend together into a continuous experience. The concept of before and after loses some of its weight. What matters more is now, not the sharp now of urgency, but the broad now of presence. This softness extends to how the future is imagined. Without a strict sense of time passing, anticipation fades. There is less leaning forward, less reaching ahead. Attention settles into what is currently unfolding. This does not feel limiting. It feels expansive. Antarctic does not erase time, it stretches it until it becomes spacious. The clock still exists, schedules still function, but they no longer dominate perception. They become tools rather than rulers. Time is something you use when needed and set aside when it is not. The environment supports this shift. The sky continues its slow rotation. Stars trace wide arcs. The earth turns without pause. Nothing rushes. And in that absence of haste, something quiet emerges. A sense that time is not something you are running out of, nor something you must chase. It is simply something you are moving within. Antarctic reveals time not as a line, but as a field, broad, continuous, and gently moving. Here, time does not push you forward, it carries you. And as the sky hangs low and clear above the white surface, and the planet turns steadily beneath your feet, the final realization settles in. Time has not disappeared. It has softened. It has become flexible, forgiving, wide enough to rest inside. In Antarctic, time is no longer a demand. It is a quiet companion, moving at the same unhurried pace as the world itself. Some places on Earth are shaped by forgetting. Rivers erase their banks. Forests reclaim what once stood. Cities rise, crumble, and rise again. Time moves forward, and much of what once existed dissolves into traces, fragments buried, scattered, or rewritten. Antarctic is different. This is a place where forgetting does not come easily. Here, the air itself has been preserved, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but physically. Tiny pockets of ancient atmosphere are sealed away, held quietly within layers of compacted snow. Antarctic stores the breath of the past. As snow falls, it does not melt and disappear as it would elsewhere. There is no cycle of thaw and release, no seasonal erasure. Instead, each snowfall remains. Layer upon layer, snow accumulates. Pressure builds slowly. The lower layers compress, tightening gently around whatever they contain. Air becomes trapped, not intentionally, not dramatically, simply caught in place as time continues to pass. These trapped air bubbles hold something remarkable, the exact composition of Earth's atmosphere at the moment they were sealed. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, trace gases drifting through the sky thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years ago. In most places, the atmosphere is fleeting. It moves, it changes, it mixes and disperses. In Antarctic, the air is archived. Each layer of compacted snow marks a year that has passed, not in celebration, not in record-keeping by design, just accumulation. One year settles on top of the next, quietly and without interruption. No storms of rain to wash layers away, no heat to dissolve the structure. Time here stacks vertically. If you could look through the depth of Antarctic ice, not as a descent, but as a column, you would see history arranged in order. Recent years near the surface, older years pressed deeper below. There are no gaps, no missing chapters. Antarctic does not lose time. In this environment, forgetting is nearly impossible. Elsewhere, memory requires witnesses. Stories must be told. Records must be kept. Artifacts must be protected. Here, memory exists without narration. Antarctic does not remember because it tries to. It remembers because conditions allow nothing to be erased. This makes it the largest climate archive on Earth. Not a library built by humans, but a storage system created by stillness and cold. No other place holds such a long, continuous record of the planet's atmospheric history. Not oceans, not forests, not sediments. Only here does time remain layered, intact, and readable. Wind moves across the surface, but it does not disturb what lies beneath. It carries traces of the past, not stories, not voices, but signatures. Particles lifted from distant places, scents of other eras, subtle markers of change. The wind itself becomes a courier of memory, though it does not know what it carries. Cold plays a crucial role in this preservation. In Antarctic, low temperatures slow everything down. Chemical reactions that would normally occur are delayed. Processes that might alter or erase records are subdued. Change still happens, but at a different pace. This slowness protects information. Molecules remain stable longer. Structures hold their form. The passage of time becomes gentler, less destructive. Antarctic does not freeze history in place. It slows it enough that it can be kept. Because of this, the continent holds evidence of climates very different from the present. Periods when the Earth was warmer than it is now. Times when greenhouse gases were more abundant. Ages when ice retreated and advanced in long, patient cycles. It also holds memory of colder worlds, colder than anything experienced in human history. Times when ice extended farther, when temperatures dropped lower, when the planet breathed differently. These shifts are not dramatic in the way stories often are. They are gradual, measured, layered. Antarctic does not emphasize change, it simply records it. There is no judgment stored in the ice, no warning, no lesson written in bold. Just data, just presence. The continent does not interpret what it holds. It does not explain or contextualize. It keeps. This makes Antarctic a unique kind of memory. It does not remember the way humans remember. There is no narrative thread, no emotional coloring. The ice does not care what the past means. It does not weigh outcomes or assign significance. It preserves without preference. In this way, Antarctic becomes the passive memory of the planet, a place where Earth deposits its past without commentary, a quiet vault where nothing is highlighted and nothing is dismissed. Events that matter deeply to living things, changes in temperature, shifts in air composition, slow transformations of climate, are held with the same neutrality as uneventful years. Everything is given equal space. This impartiality is part of what makes the memory so valuable. There is no rewriting, no selective preservation. The ice does not forget inconvenient years. It does not favor dramatic ones. It holds what happened exactly as it was. Antarctic does not tell the story of Earth's past. It simply refuses to let it disappear. And in that refusal, it becomes something rare. A memory without witnesses. A record without interpretation. A history that exists whether or not anyone looks at it. The continent remains silent, vast and still, holding the breath of ancient skies within itself, waiting without expectation. There is a difference between remembering and telling. Most places on Earth that hold history also speak about it, Rocks fracture and reveal layers. Trees record seasons in visible rings. Landscapes display scars of fire, water, and movement. Antarctic does none of this. Its memory does not rise to the surface. It does not announce itself. It does not invite interpretation. What it holds remains internal. The continent does not present its past as a story. There are no chapters laid out in sequence, no moments emphasized over others. The ice does not highlight turning points or moments of drama. It simply keeps. This quality makes Antarctic unlike any other archive on the planet, not because it holds more information, though it does, but because of how it holds it. Memory here is passive. It does not select. It does not organize. It does not judge. Everything that arrives is treated the same. Particles carried by ancient winds, traces of distant eruptions, subtle shifts in atmospheric balance. They are accepted quietly, pressed into place, and left undisturbed. The continent does not react to what it stores. It does not resist warming periods or emphasize colder ones, does not distinguish between stability and change. From the perspective of the ice, all moments are equal. This neutrality is rare. Human memory is shaped by meaning. We remember what mattered to us. We forget what did not. Antarctic remembers what happened, not what felt important. This makes its memory honest, in a way that stories cannot be. There is no editing here, no emphasis, no omission. The ice does not compress some years more tightly than others. It does not blur inconvenient periods or preserve dramatic ones more clearly. Time passes, and each moment settles into place with the same quiet acceptance. Because of this, Antarctic becomes the longest uninterrupted record the planet possesses, not a record of events, but of conditions, of states, of balance and imbalance. It remembers warmth without nostalgia, cold without alarm. When the planet entered warmer phases, the ice accepted that breath. When temperatures fell, it accepted that too. There was no preference. The continent does not compare eras. It does not frame one as better or worse. This lack of judgment is what gives Antarctic its unique authority. It does not persuade. It does not warn. It does not reassure. It simply holds. In this way, Antarctic functions less like a book and more like a mirror, but one that does not reflect the present. Instead, it reflects the planet back to itself across immense stretches of time. Earth places its history here not as a message, but as a deposit, a quiet transfer. The planet exhales, and Antarctic receives, over and over across ages that extend far beyond human awareness. This exchange does not require attention to continue. It happens whether or not anyone notices. That is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this memory. It does not exist for an audience. If no one ever studied the ice, the record would still be there. If no one ever listened, the memory would remain intact. Antarctic does not care if its past is understood. This indifference gives it stability. Nothing is added for effect. Nothing is removed for clarity. The memory remains as it was placed, untouched, unaltered, unargued. Over time, this creates a depth of continuity that is difficult to grasp. Not depth in a physical sense, but depth of duration. the continent has been receiving. The planet's passed for longer than any human structure has existed, longer than agriculture, longer than cities, longer than language as we know it. While civilizations rose and disappeared elsewhere, Antarctic continued its quiet work, receiving, holding, waiting. This patience does not come from intention. It comes from conditions. Cold slows change. Stillness prevents disturbance. Isolation protects continuity. Together, they create an environment where memory can exist without being consumed by time. This is why Antarctic can be described as the planet's passive memory. Not a memory that recalls, but a memory that endures. It does not reach outward. It does not seek expression. It remains inward, steady, and complete. And because it does not interpret what it holds, it remains open to understanding. Anyone who approaches this archive must do the work of reading it themselves. The ice does not guide interpretation. It does not provide conclusions. It offers only what is there. This absence of instruction is a form of generosity. It allows the past to exist without being shaped by present concerns, without being reframed to suit modern narratives. Antarctic does not belong to the past or the present. It belongs to continuity, a place where the planet's memory is kept intact, not because it is valued, but because it is undisturbed. This distinction matters. Memory preserved by intention can be altered. Memory preserved by stillness remains stable. Antarctic remembers because nothing interferes. And so, the continent remains quiet. Not silent because it has nothing to say, but silent because it is not trying to speak. It holds the planet's past the way stone holds pressure, without commentary, without release, without change. A memory that does not argue with time, a memory that does not resist the present. Just a vast, patient archive, waiting without expectation, keeping what was exactly as it happened. In Antarctic, the past is not revisited. It is simply allowed to remain. When most people imagine a desert, they think of heat. They picture sand dunes shaped by sun and wind, dry air shimmering above the ground, a place defined by the absence of water. Antarctic does not fit that image, and yet it is the largest desert on Earth. Not because it lacks ice, but because it lacks moisture. Here, snow does not mean wetness. White does not mean abundance. Cold does not imply water in motion. Antarctic receives less precipitation each year than the Sahara. In some regions, snowfall is so rare that decades can pass with almost no new accumulation. What does fall arrives quietly, in fine grains, barely noticeable as it settles. This is dryness of a different kind. The air holds almost no moisture. There is no rain, no flowing water carving paths across the surface, no seasonal melting that carries nutrients or reshapes the land. Snow falls, but it does not behave like water elsewhere. It does not soak into soil. It does not run downhill. It does not collect. Instead, it stays where it lands. In Antarctic, snow is not part of a cycle. It is part of a record. Because temperatures remain low year-round, the snow does not melt and move. It simply accumulates, compressing slowly under its own weight. Over time, it becomes part of the surface itself. This creates a paradoxical landscape. a place covered in snow that is, at the same time, profoundly dry. There are no rivers on the surface, no streams tracing routes through valleys, no lakes reflecting the sky. The usual language of geography does not apply here. Elsewhere, water reveals terrain. It cuts channels, exposes layers, and makes the shape of land visible. In Antarctic, water does not travel. It exists, but it remains still. Locked in place by cold, it does not participate in erosion or flow. The surface stays smooth, unmarked by movement. This stillness gives Antarctic a peculiar quality. Without surface water, there is no obvious sense of direction, no downhill path suggested by gravity and flow, no indication of where land rises or falls. Everything appears flat, even when it is not. The absence of surface movement hides the true form of the continent. Beneath the ice lies a complete landscape. Not an empty foundation, not a featureless base, but a full continent with structure and complexity. There are mountains beneath the ice, deep valleys, broad highlands, ridges and basins formed long before the ice arrived. But none of this is visible. The ice acts as a blanket, smoothing everything into a single pale plane. Sharp features disappear beneath it, edges soften, relief dissolves. From above, Antarctic looks simple. From within, it is anything but. This concealment is not dramatic. There is no sense of mystery being teased or revealed. The landscape does not hint at what lies hidden. It does not invite discovery. The ice does not part. The surface does not crack open to show what is below. The land remains covered, quietly and completely. Some of the mountain ranges beneath Antarctic ice have never been seen directly. They have no names spoken aloud, no shapes recognized by the human eye. They exist without recognition. In most places, mountains define landscapes. They dominate horizons. They become symbols, destinations, challenges. Here, mountains are present, but unexpressed. They do not rise into view. They do not demand attention. They do not shape identity. They simply exist, carrying their weight beneath the ice, indifferent to whether they are known. This creates a rare kind of humility in the landscape. The ice does not erase the land beneath it. It does not destroy it. It simply refuses to display it. The terrain yields to the covering above, allowing the surface to appear calm and uniform. In Antarctic, the land does not insist on being seen. This is a reversal of how beauty is usually understood. Elsewhere, beauty is often associated with exposure, with dramatic forms revealed to the eye, with contrasts, edges, and variation. Here, beauty exists without presentation. The surface does not advertise what lies beneath. It offers no clues, no previews. The flatness is not a simplification. It is a veil that does not hide out of secrecy, but out of indifference. The continent does not need to display its complexity to justify its existence. It does not rely on admiration. This makes Antarctic feel less like a landscape designed to be visited and more like one that exists entirely for itself. The dryness reinforces this feeling. Without flowing water, the land does not change quickly. Erosion slows to a near halt. Features beneath the ice remain preserved, not sharpened or worn away. Time passes, but form endures. In this way, Antarctic holds two contrasting states at once. Above, a surface that appears simple, smooth, and restrained. Below, a fully formed continent with structure and depth. The ice connects these states without favoring either. It does not reveal the land. It does not destroy it. It simply rests above it. This resting is not temporary in any meaningful sense. It is not waiting to be removed. It is not a phase to be endured. The ice is part of the landscape's identity. Together, ice and land create a geography that does not seek recognition. A place where complexity is allowed to remain unseen. This idea can feel unfamiliar. In human terms, value is often tied to visibility. What is seen is what is acknowledged. What is hidden is often dismissed. Antarctic challenges this instinct. Here, the most intricate beaches exist without witnesses. Entire mountain ranges hold their form without ever meeting the eye. And yet, they are no less real. The surface remains flat, quiet, and pale. The desert stretches on, dry and still. Snow continues to fall rarely, gently, without drama. No rivers appear. No paths form. The landscape remains patient. Antarctic does not hurry to show what it contains. It does not compete for attention. It exists fully, whether or not anyone notices. And in that existence, something subtle becomes clear. A place does not need to be seen to be complete. It does not need to be understood to endure. Here, the land rests beneath its covering, unchanged by neglect or ignorance. A hidden landscape, not waiting, just being. Some landscapes insist on being seen. They rise sharply. They cut the horizon. They announce themselves from a distance. Antarctic does the opposite. Here, the land practices restraint. Beneath the smooth surface of ice lies a continent as complex as any other on Earth. There are mountain ranges folded into the crust, deep valleys carved by forces far older than the ice above them, broad plateaus and uneven terrain shaped long before the world became cold enough to cover them. And yet, none of this rises into view. The ice does not follow the contours of the land below. It softens them. It evens them out. It presses gently downward, smoothing sharpness into quiet. Mountains exist here without ever becoming peaks. They do not pierce the sky. They do not interrupt the horizon. They do not demand recognition. Some of these mountain ranges have never been seen directly by human eyes. They have never been photographed in light. They have never cast a visible shadow. They exist as forms, not as images. In most places, mountains define identity. They become landmarks. They acquire names. They gather stories. In Antarctic, many mountains remain unnamed. Not because they are insignificant, but because they do not present themselves. They do not ask to be identified. They remain content beneath the covering above. A mountain without a name is a rare thing in human experience. Naming is usually how we claim understanding, how we say, this exists in relation to us. Here that impulse finds no surface to attach itself to. The land does not resist naming. It simply does not require it. This creates a geography that feels unusually modest. Not small, not simple, but quiet in its self-assurance. The terrain does not compete with the ice that covers it. It yields to it. The ice, in turn, does not erase the land. It does not crush it into nothing. It rests above it, evenly and without tension. This relationship changes how the landscape is perceived. From above, Antarctic appears calm and uniform, a continuous plain of white, barely disturbed by variation. From within, though never fully revealed, the land below remains intricate and intact. This contrast is not dramatic. There is no moment of revelation. The continent does not switch between hidden and visible. It remains layered, always. The surface becomes a kind of agreement between what is present and what is expressed. The ice agrees not to display the land. The land agrees not to insist. Together, they form a landscape that does not rely on exposure. In this way, Antarctic challenges the idea that geography must be visible to matter. Elsewhere, shape is everything. Ridges signal boundaries, slopes indicate movement, heights suggest dominance. Here, shape withdraws. Relief exists without display, elevation without emphasis, depth without shadow. The surface appears almost humble despite what it contains. This humility is not accidental. Without surface water, without erosion, without flowing rivers to carve and expose, the land beneath remains preserved rather than revealed. In wetter environments, water acts as a storyteller. It cuts paths that expose layers. It reveals history through motion. In Antarctic, water does not perform this role. It does not flow across the surface. It does not carve channels. It does not uncover structure. As a result, the terrain keeps its secrets without effort. The ice becomes a cover that does not conceal out of secrecy, but out of stillness. Like a cloth resting over an object, not to hide it, but to let it remain undisturbed. This gives Antarctic a feeling of restraint that extends beyond appearance. The landscape does not need validation. It does not need witnesses. Its mountains are no less real because they are unseen. Its valleys are no less deep because they are untraveled. Existence here is not tied to observation. This is a difficult concept for the human mind. We are accustomed to equating visibility with importance. What can be seen feels more real. What remains hidden feels incomplete. Antarctic quietly refuses this equation. Here, completeness does not depend on exposure. The land is whole whether or not it is acknowledged. This changes the emotional tone of the place. There is no sense of anticipation, no feeling that something must eventually be revealed for the landscape to be fulfilled. Nothing is waiting. The hidden mountains are not waiting to be discovered. They are not incomplete without recognition. They simply are. The surface reflects this attitude. Flatness becomes a form of calm rather than emptiness. Uniformity becomes a form of balance rather than lack. The ice does not advertise what lies beneath. It does not tease complexity. It rests, and in that resting, it allows the land below to remain exactly as it is. This creates a rare kind of beauty. Not the beauty of contrast or drama, not the beauty of extremes, but the beauty of restraint. A beauty that does not rise to meet the eye, that does not demand admiration, that does not change when ignored. Antarctic holds its complexity inward. The land beneath the ice does not push upward. It does not distort the surface to make itself known. It accepts being covered, and the ice, in turn, accepts carrying that weight. Together, they form a landscape that does not argue with itself, a continent that does not insist on being interpreted, a place where the most dramatic features remain quiet and where presence does not require display. Some secrets are kept because they are fragile, others because they are valuable. Antarctica holds its secrets for a different reason. Here, what is hidden does not need protection. It needs only space. The ice that covers the continent is not a barrier meant to keep eyes away. It is more like a blanket laid gently across something already complete, not to hide it from view, but to allow it to rest. The surface does not suggest that something lies beneath. There are no hints, no signs, no gestures of invitation. Nothing calls attention downward or inward. The land remains covered without effort. This gives Antarctica the quality of a secret that is not waiting to be uncovered, a secret that does not anticipate discovery, one that exists independently of curiosity. In human experience, secrecy often implies tension, something withheld, something unfinished. Here, secrecy feels different. It feels settled. The landscape beneath the ice does not press upward. It does not distort the surface to announce its presence. Mountains do not strain toward visibility. Valleys do not carve themselves open. Everything remains in balance. The ice accepts the shape of what lies below without revealing it. The land accepts the cover without resistance. This mutual acceptance creates a sense of quiet agreement, a continent that does not argue with itself. Antarctica becomes less a place of hidden things and more a place of withheld display. Nothing is missing, nothing is incomplete. The flatness of the surface is not a loss of detail. It is a decision made by conditions. Cold prevents flow. Dryness prevents erosion. Stillness prevents exposure. Together, these elements form a geography that does not change easily and does not reveal itself quickly. Time passes, but the surface remains calm. In this calm, the idea of beauty changes. Beauty is often defined by what can be seen, by contrast, by variation, by drama. Antarctica does not offer these easily. There are no sudden views, no breathtaking reveals, no moments of visual reward that arrive with movement. Instead, the beauty here is consistent. It does not peak, it does not surprise, it does not fade. It exists as a condition rather than an event. The surface does not become more beautiful when observed. It does not perform differently when noticed. It remains the same. This makes Antarctica a place where beauty does not depend on attention. The land does not need to be admired to justify its form. It does not need to be photographed, described, or remembered. It is enough that it exists. This idea runs counter to how we often understand value. We are used to thinking that what is unseen is less important, that what is unrecorded might as well not exist. Antarctica quietly disagrees. Here, entire mountain systems exist without ever being viewed. They do not diminish because they lack names. They do not lose meaning because they are not part of human narratives. They remain. The ice above them does not erase their presence. It does not flatten them into insignificance. It simply chooses not to display them. This restraint creates a landscape that feels deeply self-contained. The continent does not orient itself around visitors. It does not shape itself to be understood. It exists on its own terms. Even the desert quality of Antarctic reinforces this independence. Without water moving across the surface, the land does not constantly rewrite itself. It does not rush to change form. It does not adapt to be seen differently. The surface remains consistent across time. Snow accumulates slowly. Ice thickens gradually. The hidden land below remains preserved rather than transformed. This preservation is not an act of care. It is a consequence of stillness. And stillness here is abundant. The result is a continent that feels complete without interaction. It does not ask to be visited. It does not promise revelation. It does not offer spectacle. Instead, it offers continuity, a place where complexity is allowed to remain quiet, where detail exists without emphasis, where form does not insist on being known. Antarctic feels less like a landscape waiting to be explored and more like one that already knows itself. This quality can be unsettling at first. We are accustomed to landscapes that respond to us, that reveal themselves as we move through them, that reward effort with insight. Antarctic does not respond. It does not change when approached. It does not offer new perspectives when circled. It remains steady, indifferent to proximity. This indifference is not coldness. It is neutrality. The continent does not reject attention. It simply does not rely on it. And in that independence, something subtle becomes possible. The observer is freed from the role of interpreter. There is no pressure to understand, no expectation of insight. You do not have to extract meaning from what you see. You do not have to decode the surface. You can simply exist alongside it. This is perhaps the most restful aspect of Antarctic's hidden landscapes. They do not invite analysis. They do not encourage explanation. They allow presence without interpretation. The ice-covered surface becomes a kind of pause. A pause from seeking, from uncovering, from naming and categorizing. Here, it is acceptable not to know. The mountains without names do not ask for them. The valleys without views do not ask to be seen. They are complete as they are. Antarctic, in this sense, becomes a place where existence is not tied to recognition. A reminder that things can be real, complex, and meaningful without ever entering the field of view. The continent does not need to be understood to endure. It does not require acknowledgement. It simply continues, covered, quiet, whole. And as the surface stretches on, flat, pale, and unchanging, the realization settles in gently. Not all beauty rises to meet the eye. Not all complexity seeks expression. Some landscapes are content to remain folded inward, their presence complete, their form intact, their existence unquestioned. Antarctic is one of these places, a continent that keeps its shape beneath a veil of ice, not to hide, not to tease, but to rest. A hidden world that does not need discovery. A beauty that does not need to be seen, only to be. Antarctic is the only continent on Earth with no native human population. No ancestors are buried here. No stories begin here. No families trace their roots back through generations of snow and wind. This absence is not the result of conflict or displacement. It is simply the nature of the place. humans did not arrive early enough to belong, and when they did arrive, they did not stay. There are no cities in Antarctic, no villages, no permanent homes shaped by repetition and memory. Everyone who comes here knows from the beginning that they will leave. In this way, all humans in Antarctic are visitors, not explorers in the traditional sense, not settlers, not inhabitants, guests. This understanding changes the tone of human presence immediately. Elsewhere, people shape the land around them. They build, expand, and adapt environments to fit their needs. Over time, those environments begin to reflect human priorities. In Antarctic, the relationship is reversed. The land remains unchanged. Human presence is temporary, carefully limited, and always conditional. No one is born here and stays. There are no generations raised beneath this sky, no childhood memories anchored to this surface. Life here is borrowed. The structures that allow humans to exist in Antarctic are not communities in the usual sense. There are research stations, small, isolated outposts scattered across the continent. Each station stands alone, separated from the others by vast distances of ice and air. There are no roads connecting them, no casual visits, no shared neighborhoods. From above, these stations appear as tiny marks against an immense white field. From within, they feel like islands. Not islands surrounded by water, but by emptiness. Each station operates as a self-contained world. Food, energy, heat, and communication are carefully managed. Nothing is taken for granted. In many ways, these stations resemble spacecraft more than buildings. They are sealed environments, controlled atmospheres, carefully maintained systems designed to support life in a place that otherwise would not. Inside, temperatures are regulated, air is filtered, light is artificial when needed. Outside, the continent continues unaffected. This similarity to space is not accidental. Antarctic is often used as a testing ground for missions beyond Earth, not because it looks like space, but because it demands similar discipline. Isolation, self-sufficiency, reliance on routine. Life inside a research station revolves around small, repeated habits. Meals happen at the same times each day. Work follows predictable schedules. Tasks are broken into manageable pieces. This repetition is not monotonous. It is stabilizing. In an environment where the outside world offers no variation, routine becomes an anchor. Small rituals take on importance. A shared meal, a familiar chair, a quiet moment with a book or a screen. These details provide structure when the landscape offers none. Time outside of work stretches wide. There are long hours not filled with activity, no errands to run, no spontaneous distractions. Free time is abundant. This abundance can feel unsettling at first. In most places, free time is scarce. Here, it is unavoidable. With fewer external demands, attention turns inward. The silence plays a role in this shift. Antarctic does not provide background noise. There is no distant traffic, no crowd sounds, no constant hum of civilization. The quiet presses gently against the walls of the station and then moves inward. It reaches the people inside. In this environment, it becomes difficult to avoid oneself. Thoughts have space to unfold. Emotions linger longer. Habits become more visible. There is no rush to cover discomfort with activity, no easy escape into busyness. Antarctic does not allow haste, not because movement is forbidden, but because rushing serves no purpose here. The environment resists urgency. Weather dictates schedules, light dictates mood, distance dictates patience. Anyone who arrives expecting speed, efficiency, or constant progress is quickly disappointed. This place does not reward impatience. Those who cannot slow down often leave early, not forced out, but quietly exhausted by the mismatch between expectation and reality. Those who remain learn something different. They learn to listen, not to the wind or the ice, but to themselves. Without the usual noise of the world, internal rhythms become clearer. Patterns of thought emerge. Reactions become more visible. Antarctic acts like a mirror, not by reflecting appearance, but by removing distractions. What remains is attention. Attention to routine, attention to silence, attention to one's own pace. For some, this is uncomfortable. For others, it becomes grounding. The station continues its steady operation. Outside, the continent remains unchanged. Inside, people adjust, not by conquering the environment, but by adapting to its stillness. They learn that being a visitor here means accepting limits. Limits on movement, limits on control, limits on urgency. Antarctic does not ask humans to prove anything. It simply requires them to be present without forcing their rhythm onto the land. And in that requirement, it teaches something subtle. Belonging is not always about staying. Sometimes it is about knowing when you are only passing through. Over time, the sense of being temporary settles into the body. At first, it feels unfamiliar. The knowledge that nothing here is meant to last. That every object, every routine, every human presence has an end already built into it. But gradually, this impermanence becomes gentle. There are no long-term plans in Antarctic, no futures imagined decades ahead, no expectation of growth or expansion. Everything exists within a defined window of time. People arrive knowing the length of their stay. They mark the days not by ambition, but by rhythm. Work cycles repeat. Seasons shift slowly. And because the future here is finite, attention returns to the present. Life inside a station becomes simpler. Not easier, but quieter. Days are structured, but not crowded. Tasks are completed, but without urgency. There is time between moments and space within thoughts. This abundance of time changes how people experience themselves. Without constant stimulation, the mind begins to slow. Thoughts are no longer pushed aside by new inputs. They are allowed to finish. This can feel uncomfortable at first. Unanswered questions rise. Old habits become visible. Patterns of thinking repeat without distraction. Antarctic does not create these patterns. It reveals them. The silence here is not empty. It is reflective. In the absence of noise, internal dialogue grows clearer. Emotions are felt more directly. Reactions are less easily hidden. For some, this leads to restlessness. For others, to clarity. There is no escape into busyness, no crowd to dissolve into, no schedule tight enough to avoid stillness. Antarctic does not allow avoidance. Those who learn to remain begin to listen differently. They listen to the pace of their own thoughts, to the rise and fall of focus, to moments of tension and release. This listening is not analytical, it is observational. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be optimized. The environment does not ask for productivity beyond what is required. It does not reward overexertion. It does not celebrate excess effort. What matters here is steadiness. Those who thrive are not the fastest or the most driven. They are the ones who adapt their rhythm, who learn when to pause, when to act, when to wait. Antarctica has little tolerance for impatience, not because impatience is punished, but because it is unsustainable. Rushing leads to mistakes. Forcing progress leads to exhaustion. Trying to impose speed on the environment leads to frustration. The continent does not resist forcefully. It simply does not respond. Those who cannot adjust often leave early, not dramatically, quietly. Those who stay begin to understand something subtle. This place does not change people. It does not reshape personalities or instill new values. It does not teach lessons in the way stories often suggest. Instead, it removes layers. Without distractions, what remains becomes visible. Habits that once went unnoticed stand out. Sources of stress become clearer. Moments of calm are easier to recognize. Antarctica acts like a filter. It strips away the unnecessary and leaves only what persists. In this way, people do not discover something new about themselves here. They encounter what was already present. The stillness makes that encounter unavoidable. Over time, listening extends beyond the self. People begin to listen to one another differently. Conversations slow. Silences are allowed. There is no pressure to fill gaps with speech. Words are chosen more carefully. In a place where nothing competes for attention, presence becomes more complete. Shared meals feel quieter. Shared work feels more focused. Relationships form not through intensity, but through consistency. The knowledge that everyone is temporary creates a gentle bond. No one pretends this is home. No one claims permanence. And because of that, there is less need to assert identity. People are allowed to simply be. When departure approaches, it does not arrive suddenly. It has always been there, waiting at the edge of awareness. Leaving Antarctica is not a loss in the usual sense. Nothing is left behind. No mark is made on the land. No trace remains once structures are removed. The continent returns to itself. This is perhaps the most important understanding humans gain here. Antarctica does not remember them. It does not change because of their presence. It does not carry evidence of their passing. The land remains exactly as it was. This realization is not diminishing. It is freeing. To exist somewhere without needing to leave a mark is a rare experience. It allows attention to shift away from legacy and toward presence, from impact and toward participation. Humans in Antarctica are not actors on a stage. They are observers within a system that does not center them. This humility is not imposed. It emerges naturally. The continent does not instruct. It does not guide. It simply continues. Those who leave carry something with them. Not souvenirs, not stories of conquest, but a quieter awareness. An understanding of what it feels like to exist without ownership, without urgency, without permanence. They return to the world with its speed and noise and density. But something lingers. a memory of stillness, of time that stretched instead of pressed, of a place where listening mattered more than speaking. Antarctic does not ask humans to change. It asks only that they notice their pace, notice their limits, notice the difference between motion and meaning. In the end, the lesson is not about nature. It is about attention. And when humans leave, quietly, temporarily, the continent remains, unchanged, unmarked, listening only to itself. Most places on Earth are defined by lines. Some are drawn on maps. Others are enforced by fences, walls, or checkpoints. Even where borders are invisible, they are felt in language, law, and belonging. Antarctic has none of these. There are no borders here, no lines dividing one region from another, no signs marking where one authority ends and another begins. The land stretches uninterrupted, indifferent to the idea of separation. You can travel for hundreds of kilometers without crossing anything that suggests ownership. No boundary stones, no guarded passages, no symbols claiming control. Antarctic is not divided because it is not claimed. There is no military presence on this continent, no bases prepared for defense, no weapons stationed beneath the sky. This absence is not accidental, it is intentional. Humanity made a rare decision here, to keep force out. In a world where power is often secured through presence and threat, Antarctic stands apart. It is one of the few places where armies never arrived and were never allowed to. The silence of the land is matched by the silence of authority. There is no permanent sovereignty in Antarctic. No nation governs it. No capital administers it. No flag flies with lasting claim. Instead, countries agreed quietly, deliberately, not to own it. This agreement did not emerge from idealism alone. It arose from caution, cooperation, and an unusual recognition of limits. Antarctic was understood as a place too vast, too extreme, and too important to be divided. To claim it would invite conflict. To militarize, it would change it irreversibly. So the decision was made to restrain ambition. Nations chose science over conquest, observation over control, presence without possession. This choice did not eliminate competition entirely, but it redirected it. Research replaced expansion, cooperation replaced dominance. Antarctic became a shared space, not owned, but accessed. This makes it a rare experiment in human ethics, not an experiment conducted in laboratories or debated in theory, but one lived out across decades of restraint. In most places, the absence of ownership creates instability. Here, it creates balance. No one builds permanent power structures. No one accumulates lasting advantage. Every presence is provisional. Every station is temporary. The land does not reward those who arrive first. It does not favor strength or numbers. It remains neutral. This neutrality reshapes human behavior. Without borders to defend, there is no need for vigilance. Without claims to enforce, there is no need for dominance. Activity here is quieter. Intentions are narrower. The focus shifts from possession to understanding. Antarctic does not belong to the present moment alone. It is treated as something that must remain available to the future. This forward-looking restraint is unusual. Most human decisions prioritize immediate benefit. Here, the priority is continuity. The agreement not to own Antarctic is, at its core, an agreement to wait. To wait before acting, to wait before claiming, to wait before altering what cannot easily be restored. This waiting is not passive. It requires maintenance, renewal, ongoing commitment. Each generation must choose again, not to cross certain lines. And so far, that choice has held. Antarctic remains demilitarized. It remains unowned. It remains open, but not exploited. This does not mean the continent is untouched. Research stations exist. Instruments are placed. Data is gathered. But all of this occurs within boundaries that are carefully maintained, not geographic ones, but ethical ones. Limits are respected. The land is approached with caution rather than entitlement. This approach is not perfect. It requires constant negotiation. It depends on trust between nations that do not always trust each other elsewhere. And yet here, cooperation persists. Antarctic becomes a reminder of what humanity is capable of when it chooses restraint over control. It shows that not every place must be divided, not every resource must be owned, not every opportunity must be seized. Some places can be left whole. This does not make Antarctic a utopia, it makes it a question. A question about how humans relate to the planet, about what it means to share rather than possess, about whether limits can be chosen rather than imposed. The continent does not answer these questions. It simply exists as evidence that another approach is possible. Antarctic does not enforce peace. It does not demand cooperation. It allows it. By remaining without borders, it removes one of the most common sources of conflict. By remaining without armies, it removes the language of force. By remaining without ownership, it removes the pressure to compete. What remains is space. Space to observe, space to study, space to practice restraint. This makes Antarctic less a territory and more a concept, a place where humanity agreed, at least for now, to step back, to let the land exist without being claimed, to accept that some parts of the world do not need to belong to anyone. In a planet increasingly shaped by boundaries and ownership, this choice stands out. Quiet, fragile, remarkable. Antarctic does not celebrate this distinction. It does not display it. The ice remains silent. The horizon remains unbroken. But within that silence, the decision endures. A rare moment where humanity chose not to take. A place without borders, not because it cannot be divided, but because it was agreed that it should not be. The world beyond Antarctic is changing quickly. Cities grow brighter, seasons shift. The rhythm of human life accelerates, pressing forward with urgency and noise. But here, at the far edge of the planet, something remains unchanged. Antarctic continues at its own pace. The ice does not hurry. The wind does not rush. Light still moves slowly across the surface, lingering longer than expected. While the rest of the Earth responds to movement and demand, this continent holds steady. It absorbs no urgency. It reflects no impatience. Change may reach its edges, but it does not dictate the rhythm within. Antarctic exists as a counterbalance, a place where time stretches instead of compresses, where motion is gentle, where stillness is not absence, but presence. This slowness is not resistance. It is not denial. It is permission. Permission for the planet to rest within itself. Permission for systems to breathe without interference. Permission for silence to exist without explanation. Antarctic does not try to shape the future. It does not prepare for it or imagine it. It simply remains. In doing so, it offers something rare, a space where the earth can be quiet, not empty, not forgotten, but calm. As long as Antarctic exists in this way, wide, pale, and unhurried, there is a place on the planet where nothing is required to happen. A place that does not ask for attention, that does not demand change. It exists so the earth does not have to be loud everywhere. And as this journey slows to its end, that stillness lingers. You don't need to carry it forward. You don't need to remember it clearly. Just know that somewhere, far from urgency and noise, the planet is resting. And for now, that is enough. Now it's time to gently leave Antarctic. Not by turning back, not by retracing steps, but by simply drifting away. No footprints remain behind you. The surface stays smooth and unmarked. The continent does not notice your absence, and it does not need to. Antarctic remains exactly as it was, wide, pale, and silent, breathing at a pace far slower than the world you came from. As you move away, your own breath begins to slow. Each inhale softer than the last. Each exhale a little longer, a little heavier. Thoughts loosen their grip. Edges soften. Nothing needs to be carried with you. Somewhere at the bottom of the planet, the earth is resting within itself. Ice holding stillness. Silence holding time. Antarctic is not a place you visit. It is a pause the planet keeps for itself. And now you can rest too. Let the quiet remain there, far away, steady, unchanged. For you, there is only calm and sleep. Good night.